Hello everyone. We received news that 3 Singaporean citizens were arrested for being exposed to radicalism. Who are these 3 individuals? Why did they become radical? And how were they arrested? Let's follow the news until the end. This is from CNA.id. Suspected of being exposed to radicalization, 3 Singaporean men were arrested by the Lion City Security Department. Each of the 3 men had taken steps to familiarize themselves with guns, with one visiting a shooting range in Bangkok. 3 men whose radicalization was sparked or accelerated by the Israel-Hamas conflict were detained under the Internal Security Act in November 2024. The Internal Security Department, ISD, said on Thursday, Jan 9th. The 3 Singaporeans had separately radicalized themselves online and had been preparing to engage in armed violence overseas. Although their cases are unrelated, their radicalization was triggered or accelerated by the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, ISD said. Each of the 3 men had taken steps to familiarize themselves with weapons, with one visiting a shooting range in Bangkok. They were arrested in October 2024. Since the Israel-Hamas conflict began in October 2023, ISD has handled at least 5 Singaporeans under the ISA whose radicalization was triggered or accelerated by the conflict. Practice with toy guns. Muhammad Indra Akmal Effendi, 21 years old, was working as an elevator mechanic at the time of his arrest. His radicalization began after Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. He began consuming online content about the situation in Gaza, showing Palestinian civilians being killed by the Israel Defense Forces, IDF. He also found extremist material about armed jihad and martyrdom. Emotionally affected by the suffering of the Palestinian people, he developed a hatred for the IDF, and within weeks developed a strong desire to fight for Hamas against the IDF in Gaza, the ISD said. He believes this is a legitimate form of armed jihad and aspires to become a martyr in battle. In preparation for his trip to Gaza, Indra researched possible routes. He identified online foreign contacts based in the Palestinian territories who he thought could help him get around Gaza. He also made preparations to be combat-ready, ISD said. With a background in martial arts, he honed his unarmed combat skills by doing conditioning training exercises at home, the agency said. He also practices reloading and pulling the trigger with his toy guns every day to improve his muscle memory in holding the gun. Indra also searched online for shooting ranges in Batam, where he could practice with real firearms. Visiting a shooting range in Bangkok. Mohammad Latif Rahim, 41, was a director of a digital marketing company when he was arrested. He was domiciled in Bangkok and was arrested upon returning to Singapore. He began his path of radicalization in 2010 after he began consuming online content about Islamic eschatological prophecies relating to the end times. Over the years, he became convinced that this would happen in his lifetime, and that it was his religious duty to fight alongside the mujahideen or fighters against the enemies of Islam this period. The Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, and the expansion of the conflict involving Iran convinced Latif that the end times were near. This accelerated his desire to engage in armed violence. He views the IDF and the Israeli government as enemies for causing suffering to Palestinians. Latif, a Shiite Muslim, considers Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to be the prophesied leader who will lead the Mujahideen to fight against the enemy during the end times, the ISD said. He believes that Khamenei will call on Muslims to engage in armed jihad. He is ready to respond to that call by traveling to the Middle East to join Iran's military forces or Iranian-backed militant groups such as Hezbollah. Even before the last Israel-Hamas conflict, he had been making preparations for his plans to engage in armed conflict. In September 2022, Latif visited a shooting range in Bangkok to familiarize himself with firearms. In early 2024, he stepped up his physical training to be ready for combat, practicing stabbing and slashing movements with a kitchen knife at least 4 to 5 times a month in Bangkok. ISD said Latif had no specific attack plans against Singapore, but he acknowledged that he was willing to carry out Khamenei's instructions, including carrying out an attack in Singapore, planning to visit shooting range in Batam. Nurisham Yusuf, 44, was working as a security officer when he was arrested. In 2020, he became interested in Islamic eschatological prophecies about the end times. He used social media to seek religious knowledge and was exposed to the teachings of radical preachers and foreign segregationists, such as Azhar Idris and Wadi Anwar. Azhar Idris, a Malaysian preacher, has incited violence against non-Muslims. For example, he has stated that anyone who has insulted Allah, the Prophet Muhammad, the Quran, and Islam should be killed. Wadi Anwar, a Malaysian preacher, has made divisive comments about other religions and communities. For example, he called the Taipasam processions devil worship and encouraged Muslims to separate themselves from Jews and Christians. Nurisham also researched material on the concept of martyrdom. He began to believe that martyrdom was the easiest way for him to atone for his sins so that he could enter heaven at the coming end times, ISD said. After the Hamas attack, he read extremist material online related to the latest conflict. He believed it was his religious duty to go to Gaza to take up arms with Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam Brigades, AQB. Like Latif, he sees the events in Gaza as a sign that the end times are near. The 44-year-old took steps to prepare himself for his plans to engage in armed violence. He researched various ways to enter Gaza and posted extensively on social media about the Israel-Hamas conflict and AQB in the hope that someone would facilitate his travel to Gaza. In addition, Nurisham believed that the military training he had undergone, including weapons handling, while serving in the Singapore Armed Forces, would be useful when he joined AQB, ISD said. He also made plans to refamiliarize himself with handling firearms at a shooting range in Batam. Act alone. ISD said the three men acted alone, and there was no indication they radicalized or recruited others in Singapore. Their family members in Singapore were unaware of their plans to take part in armed violence. These three cases highlight how overseas conflicts can impact Singapore's security, the agency said. Although it has been more than a year since the start of the conflict, the extremist narrative about it, as well as about the growing conflict in the Middle East, has not subsided. ISD reminds the public to remain vigilant against radical elements and extremist narratives which encourage or legitimize acts of terrorism and violent extremism. This is from StraightTimes.com. Company director, mechanic, and security guard detained by ISD after becoming self-radicalized. One was a 41-year-old director of a digital marketing company. Another was a 21-year-old lift mechanic, and the third was a 44-year-old security guard. All three Singaporean men were arrested by the Internal Security Department, ISD, in October 2024, a year after Hamas attacked Israel on Oct 7th, 2023. They were affected by the conflict and had been separately self-radicalized online, becoming determined to fight against Israel. On Jan 9th, the ISD said the men were detained under the Internal Security Act ISA in November 2024, as they were readying themselves to travel to the Middle East. They had practiced how to kill and had either gone to or planned to visit shooting ranges in Thailand and Indonesia to train using firearms. One of them was willing to carry out attacks in Singapore. The ISD identified the three men as Muhammad Indra Akmal Effendi, 21, Muhammad Latif Rahim, 41, and Nurisham Yusuf, 44. These three cases highlight how overseas conflicts can have an impact on Singapore's security, ISD said, noting that since the onset of the Israel-Hamas war, it has dealt with at least 5 Singaporeans under the ISA whose radicalization was either triggered or accelerated by the conflict. Even though it has been more than a year since the start of the conflict, extremist narratives on it, as well as on the growing strife in the Middle East, have not abated, ISD added. The Gaza health authorities said nearly 46,000 Gazans have been killed, while Hamas's attack on Israel in October 2023 killed 1,200 people, with more than 250 hostages taken. Indra and Nurisham planned to fight for Hamas in Gaza, while Latif planned to fight for Iran-linked militant groups in the Middle East. Indra the mechanic. Following the Oct 7th attack, Indra, a lift mechanic, consumed online content that showed Palestinian civilians killed by the Israel Defense Forces, IDF. He was affected by the suffering of the Palestinians and came across extremist materials on armed jihad and martyrdom. He hated the IDF and wanted to fight for Hamas, believing this was a legitimate form of armed jihad, and wanted to die a martyr while fighting. Indra prepared to travel to Gaza by researching online for possible travel routes and identifying an online foreign contact based in the Palestinian territories who he thought could help him. He honed his unarmed combat skills and practiced reloading and pulling the trigger with toy guns at home. He had searched online for shooting ranges in Batam, where he could train with weapons. Latif, the director of a digital marketing company, was based in Bangkok. He viewed online content on End of Times prophecies in 2010 and was convinced it would happen in his lifetime. He also believed it was his duty to fight the enemies of Islam during the End of Times. To prepare himself for battle, he visited a shooting range in Bangkok in 2022. The Oct 7th attack further convinced him that the end of times was imminent and that Iran's supreme leader would soon issue a call for Muslims to engage in armed jihad. Latif was ready to respond by traveling to join Iran's military forces or Iran-backed militant groups like Hezbollah. He practiced stabbing and slashing motions with kitchen knives at least 4 to 5 times a month in Bangkok. He also simulated attacks on vital body points, such as the chest and jugular veins, which he believed would cause instant death. While Latif did not have any specific plans to carry out attacks in Singapore, he admitted that he was willing to do so if instructed. He was arrested when he returned to Singapore in October 2024. Nurisham, the security guard, while looking for religious knowledge on social media in 2020, Nurisham was exposed to foreign radical and segregationist preachers. He believed martyrdom was the easiest way for him to atone for his sins to enter heaven during the impending end of times. He found online extremist materials linked to the Israel-Hamas war, becoming convinced it was his religious obligation to travel to Gaza to fight. Nurisham looked for ways to enter Gaza and posted extensively on social media about the war, hoping someone would help to get him into the war zone. He believed the military training he had undergone while serving in the Singapore Armed Force SAF would be useful. He also planned to visit a shooting range in Batam. In response to queries, the Ministry of Defence, MINDEF, said security systems and processes have been put in place at the national level and within the SAF to screen for and detect personnel who may pose security threats. A MINDEF spokeswoman said, "It is a legitimate concern and security threat that national servicemen could use their skills learnt in the SAF to commit criminal acts or acts of terrorism." The Military Security Department, within MINDEF, regularly screens for persons who might pose such threats. If identified, such persons will not be put into positions to acquire soldiering skills or gain access to equipment that pose a threat. She added that MINDEF works closely with other government security agencies and that SAF commanders also engage their soldiers regularly to strengthen cohesion and promote mutual understanding between people of different backgrounds. ISD said the 3 men acted alone and there was no indication they had radicalized or recruited others in Singapore. Their family members here were unaware of their violent plans. The 2 other cases who were radicalized in response to the Israel-Hamas war are a secondary 3 student and a former public servant who was a manager with a statutory board. They were issued restriction orders, ROs, under the ISA in June and July 2024, respectively. In an update on other cases, the ISD said Mohammed Khairul Ridwan Mohammed Sarip, 40, was released from detention on an RO under the ISA in November 2024. The former Ministry of Education teacher was the first public servant detained for terror-related offences in Singapore in October 2022. ISD say has shown good progress in his rehabilitation and was assessed to no longer pose a security threat requiring preventive detention. The ROs for 3 Singaporeans were also allowed to lapse as they had made good progress in their rehabilitation. They are former lawyer Abdul Bashir Abdul Qadir, 46, former Jemaah Islamiyah member Mohammed Hussein Sainuddin, 51, and former freelance religious teacher Murad Mohammed Said, 52. ISD reminded the public to stay vigilant against radical elements and extremist content which encourage or legitimize acts of terrorism and violent extremism. It said that possible signs of radicalization include frequently surfing radical websites, posting, sharing extremist views on social media platforms, such as expressing admiration for terrorists, terrorist groups, and the use of violence, sharing extremist views with friends and relatives, making remarks that promote ill will or hatred towards people of other races, religions, or communities, expressing intent to participate in acts of violence overseas or in Singapore, and/or inciting others to participate in acts of violence. Anyone who knows or suspects that a person has been radicalized should contact the ISD hotline as shown on this screen. Well, that's the news about the 3 Singaporean citizens involved in radicalization. Clearly, they didn't become radical due to economic factors. They are not poor. But they were influenced by extreme teachings and distorted content about the Gaza conflict. They believe that by killing others, they will earn a ticket to heaven. This radicalization pattern can be found in various parts of the world and is indeed a serious threat to global security. Therefore, stay away from dangerous religious teachings. That's all for this video. See you in the next one.